It's hard to deal with trauma because it keeps coming back over and over and over. Well, this is the tool that we've been given to let go of that over and over and over again.
You're listening to Get Your Marriage On, the fun and spicy podcast bringing you new tools and fresh ideas so that you can be the sexiest couple you know.
Abuse of any kind, whether it's physical, emotional, or sexual, is evil and wrong. Sexual abuse is particularly harmful because our sexuality is so personal to us. There's often some shame around our sexuality anyway, and the abuser takes advantage of it. It makes us feel less worthy. But healing is possible. If abuse is part of your story, I hope today's episode gives you hope. Today's guest is Nicole Graf. She happens to live in the same town as me, and we met through mutual friends, and I'm lucky to know her. She's a champion for sexy and intimate marriages, as well as a Christ follower. She's been married to her sweetheart for over 31 years, has 6 children, 4 grandchildren, and 2 more on the way. She's a certified stress management consultant, has a degree in psychology, and helps others overcome sexual abuse and find healing and hope. Something that stood out to me a lot in this interview with Nicole is just the power of forgiveness and gratitude. Like those 2 themes just came up over and over and over for me, and how important it is to get outside help and to have a really good, solid education on what really is supposed to be and not supposed to be, and the value of good role models. There's so much goodness in this episode. I hope you listen to the very end and learn a lot from it just as I did. Nicole, good morning and welcome to the podcast today.
Hi, Dan. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here today.
Great. Well, I've brought you on the podcast today because you have a really amazing story of healing from sexual abuse and trauma. And I want you to share your story with my audience. Can you go back and tell us your story?
Absolutely. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this because this is a sensitive subject for a lot of people. And I want to help people to understand that this is something that they can heal from. This is something that they can overcome in their lives. So I grew up in an LDS family, and family of 8 children. And I was sexually abused around the age of 8 years old by 2 different family members. And during that time, my parents obviously did not know about what was going on, but it came out. It lasted for a couple of years until it was actually discovered. And once the information came out, then my parents were able to step in and protect me from any further abuse from there on. So, wow. Yeah.
So, how did that affect your teenage years? How did that affect the way you viewed yourself? What was that like?
Okay, so I would say that initially there was a lot of shame around being discovered around the sexual abuse. When my parents found out, I remember my parents sitting me down and trying to get information from me. And I was so fearful and so afraid to tell them what had happened. I didn't know how to articulate really what had happened to me and how to explain to them the details of it. So I don't even know at the time whether my parents knew the extent of the abuse. Mm-hmm. I was in the abuse. I was exposed to pornography. I was exposed to oral sex, anal sex, and a lot of just fear around telling people that I was being abused. You know, it would get these other people in trouble. Maybe I wouldn't be accepted anymore. Maybe I wouldn't be loved anymore.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I think that there's a lot around that as far as exposing yourself after you've been abused. especially when you've been abused by family members, because those are the kind of people that are supposed to be the ones that take care of you. So can you trust anyone else in your family circle to take what you're saying seriously? And I don't think I could articulate that at the age of 8 or 10, but I can articulate that now as to why I wouldn't have told my parents quicker or anyone else.
Did the abusers do any tactics to keep you quiet?
Yeah, well, they just told me, if you tell your parents, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. They would do things, the manipulation around the abuse, where, this is your fault too. You don't want to tell them you're a bad girl, like things like that, where it would kind of deter me from, telling on them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Most people with a history of abuse, I think, kind of go down different roads or different paths. Like, can you talk on that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of what happened when I was abused was you start to discover the arousal of your own body. And I started masturbating. I started doing things that were not allowed in my religion, or that I was told by my parents, don't touch yourself, don't this and that. So that added to the shame. And as I grew into my teenage years, I kind of started turning to alcohol, and I drank for 2 or 3 years with friends on the down low. I became more promiscuous. I would get boyfriends, and I was still really guarded and careful, but I had a couple of sexual encounters. I had a sexual encounter when I was drunk once, when a boy took advantage of me and had sex with me. So there was a lot of things that kind of transpired after the abuse that kind of added on to that sexual trauma over time. And I finally in high school ended up with a steady boyfriend that gave me a little bit more stability, but I was sexually active with him as well.
All right. Like, how we want to continue this, but just curious, how common is abuse, sexual abuse?
So sexual abuse, from my studies in school, I did a research paper on sexual abuse and how it affects people. And the study that I found, some of the studies I found, said that the average of 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 6 boys are sexually abused on some level, ranging from ages 0 to 18 years old. And the sexual abuse can be anywhere from exposure to pornography to the actual rape of a child, or rape of that person.
Using someone else, or being used. That's
Absolutely.
awful. That's really high.
It is really high. And I think that the statistics might even be a tiny bit higher, especially in the range of boys, because generally boys will never tell,
or they won't admit to it, or whatever.
That they've been abused. And so, it's an interesting phenomenon there as well.
Yeah. I know a man that was abused as a child, I think by an extended family member, and that's affected his growing up years. And also, so it's not just women, it's boys too. It's both genders.
Yes, absolutely.
And abuse of any kind is evil. It's dark. It's awful.
Yes.
Can you talk more on like the shame component? I think in a sense, everyone on earth has some shame about their sexuality.
Yes.
We kind of inherit it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, it's interesting because throughout my life, I have come to see how humanity kind of wants to blame this shame. And they want to blame it on our religion, or they want to blame it on our upbringing, or they want to blame it on some other source outside of themselves.
Right. Then they're not responsible if it's someone else's fault.
Yes. Yeah.
So convenient.
It seems so easy, right, to do that. But shame is so deeply ingrained in us as just human beings. And, I would say this is something that has come really from just being on this planet, being part of this earthly experience. And, one of the stories that really stands out to me in the scriptures is when Adam and Eve are in the garden and they partake of the fruit. And the first thing that happens to them is that Satan comes and says, hey, you're naked.
Uh-huh.
You better cover up. That is,
Uh-huh.
God is not going to love
Someone's
you.
going to see you, right?
Yeah, he's going to see you. God is not going to love you. He is not going to accept you in this state.
Uh-huh.
And so in their shame, of
Uh-huh.
course, they go and cover up. And then they're trying to make it all better with God when they finally see him again. And
Uh-huh.
so I think that this idea of shame is very deep within us. And it's something that we all have to deal with on some level or another.
How did you deal with your shame and your abuse? Like, I want to know. So, how'd you get through all of this? Because now you have 6 children, grandchildren. You're thriving in life, and you're getting it on the shores of Lake Powell. Like, how'd you get through this?
Yeah. Well, honestly, it has been with God's hand, I would say. I want to give him the credit
Mm-hmm.
as to how healing happens for people. And so I would say for sure he is the one that's guiding me through all of this. But as far as tactically and trying to deal with sexual trauma, this to me is a lifelong journey. Some people want this to be a quick fix.
Uh-huh.
And, so I'm going to give you 3 tips, obviously, today of things that have helped me through the trauma. But I don't want to put out a message that this is something that you just take a course or you see a therapist
Uh-huh.
for.
Check a box.
Yeah, check a box or 2, and then you're going to be over it and it's all going to be great.
Uh-huh.
I want people to have a realistic view because I don't want to give people the wrong idea.
Okay.
But with that being said, there are 3 really powerful things that helped me through my abuse and also helped me with dealing with trauma over time.
Okay.
And so the first thing is that you need to get outside help. If you have really been abused, sexually abused, or I would say even physically abused, sometimes emotionally abused, any of those types of abuses, you do need outside help to help you to get through it. One of the people that I worked with over time was Jan Graf, who happened to also be my father-in-law, but he was a stress management consultant and he helped thousands of people with abuse and with, just stresses in their lives.
Uh-huh.
So he was kind of my outside source that helped me get it out of my head and get it out of my heart and help me to kind of parse through it and break it down and try and deal with it so it wasn't so big. So I would say the first thing is that you need outside help if you've been
Gotcha.
abused.
And
Okay.
I like what you mentioned there too. Like, sometimes our problems feel so large, it's easy to get overwhelmed, and so you shut down. But if you can break it up into smaller little bite-sized chunks, I bet that really helps too. Like, one step at a time instead of trying to, you know, climb the mountain in one jump.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it is no easy task to talk about what has actually happened to you. And what happens is that people will admit that they're abused or that they have been abused, or they'll say, yeah, I've had sexual trauma, but they don't actually get into the weeds of it and actually deal with what happened to them personally.
Is it because they don't want to go back? Like, they don't want to revisit? They don't want to relive it?
I think that is part of it, but part of healing is reliving it. I
Yeah.
hate to tell people that, but it really is.
Uh-huh.
It's part of, you have to kind of relive it and bring it out into the light so that you can let go of it.
Yeah. Makes sense. Um, like if you needed surgery, because I don't know, you tore a tendon or something like that, like you do have to revisit the wound to
Yeah.
get really in there so that it will heal properly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Okay,
Cool.
so the second thing,
Uh-huh.
and this is another thing that he taught me, was that the principle of forgiveness. And, in religion and Christianity, we talk about forgiveness, I guess, as kind of this thing that's like, oh, I am a forgiving person, I forgive them.
Uh-huh.
But forgiveness is an actual action. It is a power that we've been given to overcome this very thing, to
Okay. All
heal.
right. Uh-huh.
And it helps us to utilize the power of the atonement in our lives.
Uh-huh.
And so,
And for those that aren't familiar with what you're talking about, can you
yeah,
explain what that means?
yeah, absolutely. So forgiveness is the core action that releases your mind, and the 4 steps. There's actually 4 steps to forgiveness that will help you to practice
Mm-hmm.
this instead of just saying it more abstractly.
Uh-huh.
So the 4 things are: you need to be specific as to who and what you are forgiving.
Okay.
So when you're forgiving, you have to say the person's name, you have to say what they did to you as you're forgiving them.
Okay.
And you have to be, the more specific you can be, the more power that forgiveness has.
Okay.
So the second thing with forgiveness is you have to say it out loud. And so this is why, working with someone can be really powerful, because you have an advocate there or a mentor that can kind of hear you saying it and releasing that from you.
Gotcha. Right.
So the third thing is to say it in present tense. So a lot of times we as humans, we want to hold on to our hurts. Like we want justice. And
Yeah.
we feel like that if we let that forgiveness go, or if we let that thing go and we forgive somebody, that we won't get our justice.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so saying it in present tense, a lot of times we'll say, well, I will forgive. We'll put conditions on
Uh-huh.
that forgiveness, right?
Uh-huh.
I will forgive if that person apologizes to me. I will forgive, in a week when I'm not so mad about it.
Uh-huh.
Whatever it is, we put it off. And so you need to forgive in present tense. I forgive this person for doing this
Mm-hmm.
to me, or whatever, or I forgive myself. I mean, I've done a lot of self-forgiving over the years, right? And
Right.
have to do that too.
Uh-huh.
So the last step to forgiveness is you need to forgive over and over, 70 times 7. In the scriptures, Christ tells us that we must forgive. He's talking to the apostles or the disciples, and he says, they ask him, how often should I forgive? And he says 70 times 7. And that's for one offense. And so imagine how often that is that you have to forgive. And what happens is we as humans have memories. And it's great because memories help us to remember the good times, help us to remember the beautiful things in our lives, right? But memories also bring back trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And partially as a protection, right? Memories help to protect us from making the same mistakes over and over again. But it's really hard to deal with trauma because it keeps coming back over and over and over. Well, this is the tool that we've been given to let go of that over and over and over again. Every time you think of that offense, you have the opportunity to forgive again and let it go and give it away.
Mm-hmm. That's
So,
powerful. That's great. And so, have these tools helped you in all other areas of your life beyond just abuse and overcoming that?
oh yeah, absolutely. No, I personally use the principle of forgiveness every day.
That's good.
On a regular basis, and I think that as people learn this practice, that it becomes a powerful tool for you, and you can gain a lot of self-confidence over your decisions, over dealing with other people, over trusting other people when you use this principle.
So the
So,
first is get outside help. The second is forgiveness.
yeah.
What's the third
And
tip?
the last tip is gratitude.
All right.
So, you know, a lot of times when you are a victim, I hate to say victim, or I would say survivor of
Uh-huh.
trauma or sexual abuse,
Uh-huh.
you get stuck in the mindset around the abuse. It's such a heavy load to carry, and it consumes your thoughts and your feelings about who you are, about who other people are. Your mind just gets into this state of spinning downward spiral.
Mm-hmm.
And the best way to stop that is to express gratitude for what you actually do have, express gratitude for what you're hoping to create, even in your life,
Mm-hmm.
and the opportunity that you do have to create. So, gratitude is a really powerful tool. Again, that's another thing I use every day. And these are practices that are used and recommended
Mm-hmm.
throughout psychology and just throughout religion. And and the reason why is because they are real principles that help us to deal with these things.
Gotcha.
So even though they're repeated over and over again, I don't want people to go, oh yeah, I've heard that before. Like, they really are real and powerful tools.
Great. Let's go back to you and your steady high school boyfriend.
Okay.
And at what point did you start to feel like you've really started to heal from the abuse? And that's helped you kind of have more stable uh, relationships.
Okay. Wow, that's a really good question. So I grew up in kind of a rocky home. My parents didn't have a really great marriage. And so the boyfriend that I ended up with in high school, his parents had a really good relationship.
Uh-huh.
And so I had some modeling in that home where I felt stability, I felt safety, and I felt like that, hey, maybe that's something I could have in the future. I didn't know if it would be with that boyfriend, but I realized that through that, I started creating that in my own mind. And I think that we don't give ourselves enough credit for how powerful we are as creators in our
Yeah.
own lives. And abuse can take that away from you. Like, it really can. But if you can get into a state of mind where you can start creating in your mind and maybe on paper the life that you want and the life that you want to see, it really will start to manifest itself to you. And so I would say that that was kind of the first example of what I felt like a relationship should look like. And I wanted that. And so I ended up breaking up with that boyfriend before I moved to St. George to go to school. And as I was going to school here, I just knew for myself that I wanted, and I think we all have this innate
Fresh start, new beginning.
this
Uh-huh.
drive to like want a fresh start, to
Yeah.
want to like move on, and to want to
To be a
have a,
new me. Uh-huh.
and so that's what I did. I gave up drinking. I was a lot more responsible with friends and boyfriends, and a lot more just trying to live more true to myself. And I can't explain why I did that, other than, like I said, I feel like that we're inspired to become our highest selves.
Uh-huh.
And if we listen to that within us, that it will lead us down better paths. And so I feel like that's what happened with me. I ended up meeting my husband at Dixie, and
And
I
Dixie's
don't
the
know.
name of the university you're attending.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
Dixie. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
Dixie State. It was only a 2-year school then.
Okay.
That
Uh-huh.
was a long time ago. Anyway, but he's a great guy. He didn't really have any sexual trauma. He grew up in a great family. So I mean, that's another part of this equation that, I don't really want to go too deep into, but he's been a really powerful source of encouragement for me to heal, and very patient. So
That is so good. So finding, if I were to add a fourth, that's like finding love and finding what hope, like what can be, and holding on to that.
yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
Cool. I'm just really curious. Like, I hear of people that have had terrible injustices done to them. And we talked about this briefly, how you like to blame. Like, it
Yeah.
feels so good to make someone else the fault for how we feel.
Oh,
And
yeah.
sometimes we look for people to blame. And God is often an easy target.
Yes.
Did you go through that? Why do people like to blame God? And um,
Well, I
how does
think
that
that
help? How does
I
that not help? Or how do you manage the anger? I
how
guess
does
is what I'm really asking.
that help?
Uh huh.
I
It's so
think
easy to get angry about what
it
happened to
really
you.
is. I think that the reality is that we all, maybe not all of us, but we have moments of anger towards God because he is the giver and the taker. In our minds, he is all powerful. He is the one that provides or doesn't provide,
Uh huh.
right? So we kind of have this mindset around, well, why did he let this happen to me? You
Yeah,
know,
he could have prevented it. Uh
he
huh.
could have prevented it. I must be a bad person. Or, we go down these roads of, I'm not deserving. I'm not worthy. He let these things happen. And so, and, and that is absolutely something that you have to deal with when you've been through sexual abuse
Uh
or
huh.
some sort of sexual trauma. And the way I dealt with it was the same way I dealt with my abusers is I forgave him.
Okay. Uh huh.
And, you know,
It sounds kind of funny to say I forgive God.
I know it
Uh huh.
does. And it was hard the first time, but you still have to. And it
Gotcha. Uh
still
huh.
affects you the same way. It still heals you, you know, and it's a practice. I don't know what else to say about that, but that's how I was able to deal with that. That's how I was able to let go of that anger towards him.
Cool. Great. So, how are you raising your children differently, knowing your past, like what you've been through?
Well, I'm raising them. My children were never allowed to do sleepovers
Okay.
ever. I'm sure that that's hypersensitivity,
Uh huh.
but for me personally, as a parent,
It's like nothing good comes from sleepovers. We're
it
just
was
not going to do
yeah,
sleepovers.
it was just something that I never allowed them to do.
Uh huh.
And even I remember the first time, just real briefly, I remember the first time I sent my son for the first time on a scout outing.
Like an overnight camp out or something. Uh huh.
Yes, yeah. I sat in the parking lot of the church and cried profusely
I'm
because I
a
was,
horrible mom. What am I doing to my son? Let him
yeah,
stay
yeah,
overnight and camp out.
like that's the reality of what happens to you. That's
Yes,
the reality is that
because you
you
go to worst case scenario. What's going to happen? And you don't know what's going to happen in the tent, right?
and you have to talk yourself off that cliff
Uh huh.
every single time,
Uh huh.
like so like that's what I'm saying when I said at the beginning this is an ongoing thing,
Uh huh.
and like I talk myself down, I breathe through it, I do the forgiving,
Uh huh.
I express gratitude, I'm still doing these practices over and over because it still comes up. So in raising my own children, I'm teaching them these same principles. you know, I, I hope none of them, they've never told me that any of them were sexually abused,
Uh
but I
huh.
hope none of them have ever had that experience. And I hope that they never will.
Uh huh.
I also hope that I've given them these tools that I've talked to you about today and that they will use these same tools in their own lives.
That's great. And maybe it looks like you and your husband model a great relationship too for your children, and
Yeah,
that's probably a great gift you give them.
we definitely love each other. We definitely choose each other every day. I think that's the biggest thing is choosing the person
Yes.
the person that you chose.
Uh huh.
You keep choosing them every day because some days they're not that attractive.
No.
That's just the
And
reality.
choosing is an active thing. It's not like, well, you're my last resort.
Yeah. Or I'm stuck with you because I made covenants. You know what I mean?
No. Uh huh.
Like
That's not romantic at all.
it's not. It's really not. So it is a practice in choosing.
Yeah, my wife and I were talking the other night. Like, let's pretend just for a second that like we didn't have the morals of like, we had to like I could have sex with any woman on the planet. She could have sex with any man on the planet, and it didn't matter. Like,
Yeah.
would you still choose me, or would I still choose you? And I didn't have to think very long, but it was an absolute yes. I would still only choose you. But it felt like a very active choice. And if I can keep that mindset every day in my own marriage, like,
Yeah.
this is the person I want to be with more than anyone else.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's more of an active thing, even when things are tough and you know.
Yeah. And the other thing I think that I've modeled with for my children is that we have conflict. You know what I'm saying? My husband and I don't get along 100% of the time, all the time. Like, this isn't like rainbows and
unicorns and butterflies. No.
Yeah. It's not like that. I don't want to portray that to people. This is like,
but conflict is good. Like, if you don't have conflict, there's no growth.
Choosing and actively like parsing through life and trying to figure it out. And, how do we make this work? How do we get past this challenge? How do we, overcome this? How do I keep choosing you as my best friend and as my lover every day,
Mm-hmm.
So I just think that's part of the beautiful adventure of being married.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I love this. Okay. Before we close, do you have any black belt sex tips to leave our audience? By black belt, I mean, you're a pretty good couple. You're doing the whole date night thing. Things are good. You've healed from all your trauma because you're good at forgiving.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now you're ready to take your sex life to the next level. What's one tip you'd give that couple? They want to elevate the quality of their marriage and of their love life.
I would say, if you haven't yet, really explore oral sex.
All right.
Figure it out and find ways to actually bring yourself to that experience instead of, saying, well, this is what he really likes, so I do it because he wants me to, or this gets her, aroused, so I do it because, like, bring yourself to the experience.
Yeah. I've heard a lot of women say they get turned on just as much giving orally than receiving. Yeah. And as a husband, I totally see that on the reverse side. Like, giving is so much more exciting, or as exciting as receiving too.
Yes, absolutely. 100%. And I think that when you get into that mindset, when we know our minds are the most powerful part of our sexual anatomy. And so when you can get in the right mindset of, I love this, I love giving this, I love experiencing this with this person, then it will be a totally different experience for you.
That's good. Love that tip. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
If you coach, you help other women, whatever. If people want to find out more about you, where do they go?
So I am on Instagram at Naked Heart Coach, and my website will be up by the time this podcast airs, I hope, at nakedheartcoach.com.
Awesome.
So I am excited to start helping people. I graduated last May with my bachelor's in psychology, and I am just in a time of life where I've had a lot of experience, and I feel like that I have the ability to help people overcome trauma. But also, if you're in a good relationship already, I can help you bring it to the next level.
Very good. Awesome. Thank you, Nicole.
Yeah. Thank you, Dan. I really appreciate you having me on the podcast today.
We hope that you enjoyed this episode of Get Your Marriage On. And if you did, we would love it if you would take a few seconds to give us a rating on iTunes and to share the show with your friends. They'll thank you for life. Once you've done that, you can head over to getyourmarriageon.com for more resources about today's topic and to download our amazing marriage apps. Now go get your marriage on.